All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into a question that, comes up every single spring. Why does Easter move around so much? And why can't everyone just agree on one single date? I mean, you've definitely noticed this, right? Easter is just a moving target. One year it's in March, the next it's practically May. It feels totally random, but it's not. The reasons are actually locked deep inside centuries of history, a little bit of astronomy, and honestly, a pretty fundamental disagreement about what's more important, the date or the day. So let's look at a real-world example. Take 2026. You've got Passover starting on April 1st. Then, just a few days later, Western Easter lands right in the middle of it on April 5th. But wait, the Eastern Orthodox Easter? That's not until a whole week later, on April 12th. So how on earth do these three super-connected holidays end up on three different dates? Well, to figure that out, we've got to go way, way back. Okay, so our first big clue is hiding in the earliest days of the church. This is where a major debate kicked off that pretty much set the stage for everything that followed. And it all started with a simple question that had a very complicated answer. What are we actually celebrating here? So there was this huge group of early Christians, mostly out in the East, and they were known as Quartodecimans. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it literally just means 14ers. And for them, the most important thing, the only thing that mattered, was to commemorate the event on the exact date it was tied to, the 14th day of the Hebrew month of Nisan, which, you guessed it, is the day of the Jewish Passover. And that created the core conflict. You had the Quartodecimans on one side saying, look, let's stick to the historical timeline. The connection to the Passover lamb is critical. But then you had this other really powerful group, mainly in Rome and Alexandria, pushing back and saying, hold on, the resurrection happened on a Sunday, the Lord's Day. That's the most important part. So the celebration absolutely has to be on a Sunday. So how did this whole thing get settled? Well, it all came to a head at the famous Council of Nicaea back in 325 AD. And the Sunday side? They won. They decided Easter would always be on a Sunday, and they had a few key reasons for this. First, they wanted to calculate the date themselves without having to rely on the Jewish authorities. Second, it just made liturgical sense, since Sunday was already their main day for worship. And finally, it helped carve out a really distinct Christian identity separate from Jewish practices. But here's the thing. By solving one problem, they created a whole new one. They accidentally tied their most important holiday to the official calendar of the Roman Empire, the Julian calendar. And that calendar, it had a tiny, tiny flaw, a hidden problem that would simmer under the surface for centuries. Okay, you're not going to believe this. But the entire problem, the reason for literally 1,000 years of calendar chaos, came down to just 11 minutes. I mean, the Julian calendar, which Julius Caesar created, was an absolute masterpiece for its time, but it was just a tiny, tiny bit off. See, here's the deal. The Julian calendar calculated the year as being exactly 365 and a quarter days long. Simple enough, right? The problem is, the actual time it takes for the Earth to go around the sun is about 11 minutes shorter than that. Now, 11 minutes, that sounds like nothing. But imagine that tiny error piling up, year after year, century after century. It's like a debt that nobody's paying attention to, and it's just getting bigger and bigger. And this is where you can really see that debt coming due. By the 1500s, those 11 minutes a year had snowballed into 10 full days. The calendar was literally out of sync with the seasons. The spring equinox, the astronomical event that's supposed to anchor the date of Easter, was happening 10 days before the calendar said it should be. Easter was slowly but surely drifting backwards into winter. So to fix this absolute astronomical mess, Pope Gregory XIII did something pretty radical. He rolled out a brand new, much more accurate calendar, the Gregorian calendar, the one we all use today. And to get the world back on track with the actual seasons, he ordered a real-life time jump. Seriously, in 1582, people went to bed on Thursday, October 4th, and when they woke up, it was Friday, October 15th. 10 days just vanished. And right here, this is the moment the Great Split happened. The Catholic countries, and later the Protestant ones, they all adopted this new, scientifically superior calendar. But the Eastern Orthodox Church, they saw this as a move made by the Pope in Rome, all on his own. They felt it was a Catholic innovation that broke with ancient sacred tradition. So they rejected it. They stuck with the old, traditional Julian calendar, and they still use it for their calculations today. So let's boil this down. The really crucial takeaway here is that this split, this moment in history,
left us with two different Christian worlds using two different calendars. And that means they're also using two totally different rulebooks for figuring out when Easter is.
And this chart really lays it all out perfectly. Over in the West, they're using the modern Gregorian calendar, and they fixed the spring equinox to March 21st. Simple. But in the East, they're sticking with that ancient Julian calendar. Because of that calendar drift we talked about, their spring equinox now lands on April 3rd on our modern calendar. And here's another huge difference. The Orthodox Church has a strict rule that Easter must happen after Passover is over. The West, they don't have that rule.
You know, when you really get down to it, this whole complicated story of astronomy and popes and calendars, it really just brings us full circle, right back to that very first debate in the early church.
It's this classic tug of war, right, between two different values that are both totally understandable. On one side, you've got this deep desire for historical precision. You want to follow the biblical sequence of events, keeping that direct link to the Jewish Passover. But on the other side, you have the incredible power of liturgical symbolism, the need to celebrate the resurrection on a Sunday, the day that represents a whole new creation.
And that kind of leaves us with one final thought, a big question for the future. Given all this confusion, wouldn't it just be easier if everyone agreed on a fixed date, say the second Sunday in April, and just call it a day? It's a real conversation that's happening, but you have to wonder, is the weight of all this history, of all these ancient traditions, just too important to ever really change?